She saved a child from a robbery without knowing he was the son of one of the most powerful men in the city. Please subscribe to the channel. I have a goal of reaching 1,000 subscribers. Before the story begins, comment here where you're watching from. I love knowing how far our stories are reaching. And if you enjoy love stories full of emotion, resilience, and heartwarming endings, subscribe to the channel. That way you help this channel grow and continue to spread inspiring messages. The late afternoon sun bathed the streets of Atlanta with a soft golden light. The neighborhood where Grace Holloway lived was simple, with cracked sidewalks, old lampposts, and the constant smell of bread coming from the local bakery. Things were calm that day. Mothers returning from the market, kids running with backpacks, ordinary people trying to get through another day. Grace, 27, hurried down the narrow street wearing faded jeans and a wrinkled white t-shirt. Her wavy, brown hair was tied up in a messy bun, and her slightly sweaty face carried the look of someone in a rush, but who never stops observing what's around her. She carried 2 bags, one with bread and the other with her mother's medication, who was waiting at home. It was just another Tuesday. That's when she heard the scream, a sharp, desperate sound, a child's scream. She stopped. Her heart started beating faster. On the corner, in front of the bakery, a small boy with messy blonde hair was struggling to break free from the arms of a hooded man. The attacker was trying to snatch the child's backpack, but the violence was out of proportion. Desperate. Grace didn't think. She dropped everything on the ground and ran, her footsteps echoing on the pavement. "Hey, let him go! Let him go now!" she shouted firmly, not even knowing where that voice came from. The mugger looked at her for a second that was enough. Grace threw herself at him with force, slamming the man against the bakery wall. The impact was clumsy, but enough to throw him off balance. The backpack fell. The boy escaped and hid behind a dumpster. The man growled a muffled curse and ran off. Grace dropped to her knees, gasping for breath. She looked at the boy. He was shaking all over, wide blue eyes, tears streaming down his face. He was small, fragile, wearing designer clothes but completely out of place there. She approached gently. "Hey, are you okay? Are you hurt?" The boy didn't answer. He just ran into her arms. He cried uncontrollably. She held him, feeling his trembling little body pressed against her chest. She knelt on the ground, scraped, knees and all, and started rocking him as if he were her own. "It's over now. You're safe, okay? I'm here." People began to gather. An old lady called the police. A teenager filmed from a distance with his phone. The scene was chaotic, but in that hug, there were only 2 worlds. Hers, marked by loss, and his, still unknown. "What's your name, sweetheart?" she asked, brushing the blonde hair from his face. He sniffled, voice low. "Ethan. Ethan. And are you alone?" The boy nodded, sobbing. Grace felt a pang in her chest. How could a child that young be out here alone? That's when, in the distance, a black SUV screeched to a halt. A man got out, tall, wearing a tailored suit, dark sunglasses, and an expression of sheer panic on his face. The school security guard came running behind him, shouting the boy's name. "Ethan!" The man ran. "Oh my God, Ethan!" Grace stood up, still shielding the boy with her body. Ethan looked at the man and ran to him. "Daddy!" The man scooped him up tightly, his eyes locked with Grace's. It was a hard, analytical look, but full of tension. He didn't thank her right away. He just examined his son, like someone afraid to confirm a nightmare. Grace swallowed hard, still trying to understand what was happening. The guard explained that Ethan had wandered away from school for just a few seconds. The van that was supposed to pick him up was late, and no one noticed he had slipped out through the side street. Alexander Whitmore, the man now standing in front of her, turned stiffly. His gray-blue eyes seemed to cut through. "The Heir, was it you who saved my son?" Grace just nodded, still out of breath. He looked at her for a long second. "Thank you." The word came out as if it cost him something. A cold, distant, almost automatic thank you. But before any further explanation could happen, he turned around with Ethan still clinging to his chest. Grace stood there, with scraped knees, a racing heart, and the feeling that something much bigger had just happened. She picked up her bags from the ground and started walking back. Only when she turned the corner did she feel the tears she'd been holding back fall quietly. But she had no idea that the boy crying in her arms was the sole heir to $1 billion empire, and that brief encounter would change her life forever. The neighborhood police station was quiet that night, lit only by the yellowish overhead lights and the occasional sound of footsteps in the hallway. Grace was sitting in a hard plastic chair, with Ethan's hand clutched in hers like he feared that if he let go, it would all turn out to be just a nightmare. She was still wearing the same sweaty clothes from earlier, with a small stain of dried blood on her arm and a scratch on the side of her forehead. The officer had offered her a glass of water, but she barely touched it. Her eyes were fixed on the boy beside her, who was now asleep against her shoulder, as if he had finally found some kind of refuge. That's when the door opened with controlled force. The sound of expensive shoes echoed on the concrete floor like a gong. Alexander Whitmore entered the room with a presence that made the air feel heavier. He wore a flawless navy blue suit, his dark blonde hair slicked back perfectly, and a watch that probably cost more than the house Grace lived in. But what stood out the most wasn't his elegance. It was his gaze, a steady, analytical gaze that seemed to see through people, always assessing risks, never emotions. When he saw Ethan asleep on the shoulder of a stranger, he froze for a second. The boy looked peaceful for the first time in hours. Grace stood up slowly. Her hands trembled. She didn't know who he really was, not exactly. But something about the way he carried himself, the way he entered the room, made it clear this man was not just anyone. Alexander walked toward them with firm steps. The officer followed, him making room. He stopped in front of Grace and his son and took a deep breath. "I'm Alexander Whitmore," he said in a deep voice, without even needing to state the power behind the name. "This is my son." Grace just nodded. "He's okay. Just a little scared." Alexander looked at Ethan, then at her. The boy slowly opened his eyes, and as soon as he saw his father, he reached out his arms, but didn't let go of Grace's hand. "Daddy," he murmured softly, still pressed against her. Alexander hesitated. It was as if he didn't know how to react to a scene so human. Grace knelt down and whispered to the boy, "You're safe now. Your dad came to get you." Ethan looked at her with eyes full of tears. "But what about you? Are you coming with us?" She smiled, even with a tight heart. "No, sweetheart. I need to take care of my mom now, but you're going to be okay." Then the boy did something that completely broke the coldness of the room. He hugged her tightly, like he didn't want to let her go. Alexander cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the scene. "Thank you for what you did," he finally said in a formal tone. "I don't know what might have happened if you hadn't been there." Grace replied in a soft but steady voice. "He just needed someone who wouldn't run away." Alexander's eyes met hers. For the first time, there was something beyond calculation in them. There was surprise, and maybe a trace of unease. "I see," he replied, looking away. "I'll arrange for appropriate compensation." Grace took a step back, hurt. "It wasn't for money." Alexander only nodded, like someone not used to hearing no. In silence, he picked up his son. Ethan still looked back, his eyes fixed on her, as if saying everything his father didn't know how to. They left the room, and Grace was left alone. Alone, but with the strange feeling that that moment, that night, wasn't really over. Something had been planted there. Something she couldn't name. When she left the station shortly after, walking slowly with empty arms, she crossed paths with a photographer at the gate. He took her picture without permission, curious about the woman who had saved the tycoon's son. Grace barely noticed. She only felt the cold of the night climbing up her spine. She didn't know it yet, but soon the entire city would know her name. And that man, so distant and unreachable, would come looking for her, much sooner than she imagined. The next morning, Grace's face was everywhere, and not for the right reasons. The video recorded by a teenager across the street clearly showed the moment she threw herself at the hooded man and protected the boy. The footage had been posted on social media with the caption, "Woman saves child from robbery in Atlanta, an act of bravery or something staged." At first, the comments were full of admiration. This woman is a hero, pure courage. She deserves recognition. But like every viral story, the tone quickly changed. Cruel speculations began. This looks way too rehearsed. Look at the camera ready. She knew it was being filmed. Bet she found out he was Alexander Whitmore's son and planned the whole thing. This woman is far from innocent. Grace was in the small kitchen of her apartment, helping her mother with breakfast, when she heard her own voice on the TV. She slowly looked up and saw the video image playing on a morning show. Grace Holloway, a resident of South Atlanta, became a national topic after saving the son of billionaire Alexander Whitmore. But internet users are questioning whether the action was truly spontaneous. The coffee cup in her hand trembled. Her mother, pale and tired-looking, held her hand. "Sweetheart, why are they saying these things about you?" Grace forced a smile, even with the lump in her throat. "Because they don't know the truth, Mom, and maybe they don't even want to." In the following hours, she received calls from employers canceling her cleaning jobs. Clients who used to praise her honesty were now saying things like, "Better to avoid trouble, Grace. Everyone's talking about you." "My wife saw it online. We think it's best to cancel for now." By the third day, her bank account was already in the red, and her mother's medication was running out. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands covering her face, and broke down in silence. She wasn't crying out of self-pity, but from a deep sense of helplessness. She had done the right thing, and was being punished for it. Across town, in the top floor of the Whitmore's luxury condo, Alexander watched it all in silence. He was in his office, surrounded by elegant furniture, panoramic windows, and a silence as heavy as his own discomfort. Ethan, since the day of the robbery, had gone back to having nightmares. He cried at night, calling out for Grace. He refused to eat, to play. When he saw videos of her being attacked in the news, he curled up in silence. That Saturday night, Alexander called in his private lawyer, a thin, gray-haired, meticulous man named Charles. "Draft a non-disclosure agreement," Alexander ordered, without lifting his eyes from the tablet. "She's too exposed, and that puts my son at risk." Charles frowned. "You want to silence the woman who saved your son's life?" "I want to protect him, that's all. And if this exposure continues, we'll all suffer the consequences." That same night, the document was emailed to Grace, a legal agreement offering her a significant sum in exchange for her complete silence about anything related to Ethan or the Whitmore family. No interviews, no contact, no approaching them. She read every line with trembling hands, then looked at her mother, sleeping fitfully in the next room. For a moment, she thought about signing. But before she could make a decision, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. When she answered, the child's voice on the other end completely disarmed her. "Ma'am, is it you?" "Ethan." Grace sat up, surprised, gripping the phone tightly. I had another nightmare. And Daddy." Doesn't understand. I just want to see you again. Please. The call was cut off immediately after. She sat there in the dark, her heart racing. She didn't know how he'd gotten the number, but one thing was certain. Not all the money in the world could silence what had grown between her and that boy. And maybe not even his father could control the direction this story was taking anymore. The next morning, Grace was still sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the contract lying on the plastic tablecloth stained with coffee. The pen beside it felt like it weighed a ton. The silence of the apartment was broken only by the sound of the oxygen machine hissing from her mother's room and the persistent ticking of the old clock on the wall. She could still hear Ethan's voice in her mind, like a whisper that refused to leave. I just want to see you again. She didn't have time to decide. At exactly 9 a.m., 3 firm knocks sounded on the door. Strong, precise. Grace stood up quickly, clutching her worn robe around her. Through the window, she saw a shiny black car parked in front of the house, standing out almost offensively from the rest of the street. The car looked out of place in a world of rusty bikes, old vans, and makeshift fences. When she opened the door, her eyes met Alexander Whitmore's. This time, he wasn't wearing a suit. He had on a white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up, dark jeans, and simple shoes. Yet his presence was still striking, as if the world around him went quiet when he was near. The two of them stared at each other for a long, silent moment. She looked too surprised to react. Alexander glanced around. The peeling paint on the front wall, the small porch with dried-up flower pots, the crooked mailbox. There was a quiet dignity to that modest home that unsettled him, and a pain he couldn't quite name. "Can we talk?" he asked, direct but not arrogant. Grace hesitated but stepped aside. He entered, walking through the narrow living room, where an old TV rested on a crate, and stacked books shared space with medicine and grocery bags. The scent of coffee and eucalyptus filled the air. Alexander looked around, not hiding his silent shock. "Sorry for the mess," Grace said with a half-smile. "Wasn't expecting a visit from someone like you." He took a deep breath. "I didn't come for me." She looked at him. "Then who did you come for?" He looked into her eyes, not blinking. "For Ethan." Grace lowered her eyes for a second, trying to stay composed. "He can't stop talking about you. He keeps asking why you disappeared, why you never came back. He wakes up in the middle of the night. He's more closed off than ever." He paused, swallowing hard. "And I don't know what to do." She crossed her arms, trying to protect herself from the discomfort of the moment. "I thought you'd handled everything with your lawyer. Money for silence, the usual." "I was wrong," he replied. "I thought I could fix this like I fix everything, with distance, with contracts. But he doesn't want distance, he wants you." Grace felt a tightness in her chest. For a moment she forgot about the accusations, the humiliation, the injustice. She could only see that fragile little boy with blue eyes and tight hugs. "You could work with us," Alexander said after a tense moment of silence. "As Ethan's companion, it's not just out of gratitude. It's because he trusts you and because he needs you." Grace looked at him intently. Her throat tightened, heart racing. "And what about you? Do you need me to come for him or for you too?" Alexander hesitated. For the first time he seemed unsettled. "Maybe, for all three of us." She smiled sadly. "You don't know me, Alexander. You don't know what I've been through. You don't know what all this exposure is doing to me. Then let me get to know you, just this once. Let someone stand by your side." She took a deep breath. Pride screamed, but her love for Ethan, her urgent need to care for her mother, and the exhaustion of fighting alone for so long, all of it spoke louder. "All right, I'll do it. But not for the money, not out of pity. I'll do it for him, because he needs someone who stays. Alexander's eyes softened. There was something in his expression that hadn't been there days ago. Something like respect. As he left, he lightly touched the doorframe and said in a low voice, "See you tomorrow at 8. And Grace, thank you, truly." She nodded. After he left, she sat on the couch, her hands still trembling. She knew she was stepping into a world that didn't belong to her. But she also knew that sometimes destiny doesn't knock. It throws doors wide open. And that one had just opened. The next morning, the electronic gate of the Whitmore mansion opened slowly in front of the car that had come to pick up Grace. It was like crossing an invisible border, leaving behind a world of survival and entering one of aesthetic perfection, of precisely trimmed gardens, tall walls, and bulletproof glass windows that looked out at everything except reality. The main house looked like something out of an architecture magazine, massive, modern, with light marble columns, silent hallways, and an aura of elegant coldness. But beneath all that grandeur, there was a heavy silence, a home without a soul. As soon as she got out of the car, Grace felt the stares. The housekeeper, a middle-aged blonde woman named Marianne, greeted her with a cold smile. "Are you the new companion for Master Ethan?" she said, as if tasting the name on her tongue. Beside her, 2 staff members whispered and one muttered loudly enough to be heard, "That's the one from the video." Grace kept her chin up. Ethan was the one who saved her from the awkwardness. The moment he saw her at the door, the boy ran through the polished wooden halls and jumped into her arms, as if weeks had passed since their last meeting. He hugged her tightly, his eyes shining with true joy. "I knew you'd come," he said, beaming. Grace laughed, hugging him back. "I promised I would, didn't I?" Ethan pulled her by the hand. "Come on, I want to show you my room." She stepped in, now with a lighter heart. Behind a door of steel and glass was the world she would now be part of, even if she didn't know for how long. In the first days, the discomfort was obvious. Grace felt out of place. Every step was measured, every gesture was watched. The home security team monitored her every move. Marianne observed her with cold eyes, mentally noting everything. She didn't eat with the other staff. She was different, neither from the house nor from the world she'd come from. But Ethan was a beacon. During breakfast, he insisted on sitting beside her. During his tutoring sessions, he only paid attention if she was near. And at night, he refused to sleep unless she sang his favorite lullaby, a soft song Grace had made up as a child for herself on days when the world felt too harsh. "Sing it again the way you do," he'd ask, curled under the blankets. She would sing, gently stroking his hair. One night, while she was quietly singing in the dark room, she didn't notice Alexander standing at the door, watching silently. He looked at her as if he were seeing something he'd forgotten existed. He watched how she fluffed the pillow with care, kissed Ethan's forehead, and smiled as he drifted to sleep. That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. Over the following days, he started seeing her differently, the way she cared for the boy naturally, the way she laughed when Ethan tickled her, or how she sat on the floor to draw with him as if the outside world didn't exist. It was different from everything he knew. There was no effort, no mask. On the 5th night, late, Grace went to the kitchen for a glass of water. She found Alexander sitting at the counter, alone, with a glass of wine in his hand. He looked up when he saw her, and there was an awkward silence for a moment. "You sing beautifully," he said. She smiled, surprised. "It's what my mom used to do for me when I was little. Now I do it for him." Alexander studied her face for a moment. "Do you have any idea what you've done to my son?" "I hope something good," she answered honestly. "Something irreversible," he murmured. Grace looked away, but there was something in that moment, an invisible field of tension and tenderness, a silence full of everything they didn't yet know how to say. But before any word could break it, Marianne appeared at the end of the hall with sharp footsteps and interrupted the moment. Grace gave a small nod and returned to the guest room. Alexander stayed there, staring at his wineglass as if, for the first time, he was truly tasting it. For the first time since his wife's death, he felt something stronger than guilt, something real, something alive. He didn't know how to name it yet, but he felt that with her around, the house stopped being just a place of luxury and started to feel like a home. The storm that loomed over Atlanta that night felt like it had come from within. The sky roared with deep thunder. Lightning lit up the frosted glass windows of the Whitmore mansion for brief moments, revealing shadows of branches thrashing like desperate arms. The sound of rain pounding the roof echoed through every hallway, as if the house, immense, elegant, and silent, was breathing with the storm. Grace had just gotten Ethan to sleep. The boy had asked her to sing the same song twice, "Is You So," melody about courage in dark nights. He didn't let go of her hand until he fell into deep sleep, his long lashes trembling over rosy cheeks. She stayed there a few more minutes, watching the small body curled under the comforter, then slowly stood and turned off the bedside lamp with her fingers. As she left the room, she noticed the mansion was partially dark. The storm had knocked out the power, and although the generator had kicked in, only minimal lights and discreet candles had been placed by staff in strategic spots. A reverent silence filled the place, broken only by the whispers of the rain and the muffled sound of wind. Grace walked down the stairs slowly, barefoot, wearing a grey, long-sleeved shirt and light pants. The moisture in the air made every breath feel deeper. When she reached the kitchen, she was only looking for a mug of tea, but her eyes were drawn to an unexpected scene. In the adjacent dining room, in the soft glow of a single candle on the table, sat Alexander. He hadn't noticed her at first. He was leaning over his glass, fingers interlaced, shoulders slightly tense, gaze lost. He wore a white shirt, collar unbuttoned, sleeves rolled up to his forearms. The soft candlelight danced on his face, revealing more of the man than the tycoon, revealing weariness, something broken that refused to fall apart. Grace hesitated, but her presence was felt. Alexander looked up, and when he saw her, he seemed to relax without realizing. "Is Ethan all right?" he asked in a quiet voice. He fell asleep after a lot of talking, and one song played 3 times, she replied with a slight smile, walking in slowly. Alexander gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit for a bit. Tonight, the night's in no hurry." She accepted. She sat carefully, as if the moment were made of glass. He poured red wine for both of them, the bottle resting nearby like a silent witness to a different kind of night. For long seconds, they said nothing. It wasn't awkward. It was intimate. The kind of silence that only exists when there are no masks, only presence. Alexander spoke first. His voice came out like a confession he hadn't planned, but could no longer hold in. "Did you know my wife hated storms?" Grace looked up, surprised by the sudden confession. She'd lock the windows, hide in the room. She said storms reminded her of her childhood, loud, unpredictable, full of fear, full of... He slowly turned the glass between his fingers. After she died, the storms got worse, not because of the sound, but because of the silence that follows. Grace listened intently, without judgment, just listening. "I always thought I could control everything, but I couldn't save her, and that tears me apart every time Ethan looks at me searching for answers I don't have." His voice cracked at the end. Grace, eyes misty, spoke in a calm voice full of personal history. "I understand. I've spent my life trying to save my mom from a disease that doesn't forgive, and sometimes I feel guilty just for breathing when she can't." He looked up, and for the first time their eyes locked, steady, intense, real. The candle flame crackled softly. "You remind me what it means to feel alive," he said suddenly, as if the words had slipped out without permission. She held her breath. The phrase was simple, but it carried the weight of something no one had ever said to her. Their eyes lingered on each other. She placed her hand on the table, and he, in a restrained gesture, touched her fingers. The touch was light but electric, and then, with the same softness that brings back a forgotten memory, Alexander leaned in and kissed her. It was a restrained kiss, but deep. Their lips met in a gesture full of uncertainty, of discovery, as if both knew they were crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. But before the moment could build into more, he pulled back, startled by the intensity. Grace also pulled back, looking at him in silence. "This shouldn't have happened," he whispered, breathing heavily. She stood slowly but without anger. "But it did," she replied calmly. She walked away without rush, leaving only a soft scent in the air and a new emptiness in the room. Alexander stayed there, alone, lips slightly parted, gaze lost between the candlelight and the distant sound of rain beginning to fade. But inside him, for the first time in years, something had just begun. The next morning dawned cold, with a dense mist covering the immaculate gardens of the Whitmore mansion. The weather seemed to reflect what lingered in the air, a subtle tension, like a thread about to snap. Inside the house, the halls were quieter than usual, and Grace could feel it. From early on, she noticed the staff's sidelong glances and the muffled whispers that stopped whenever she walked by. Vivian Stanton, Alexander's personal assistant for over a decade, remained at her post as always. Impeccable, rigid, with her perfect bun and calculated elegance, but behind those cold green eyes, something was boiling. Ever since Grace had come into that space, Vivian felt threatened, not just by position, but by the growing affection from Alexander and the undeniable sparkle in Ethan's eyes every time he mentioned Grace. She had witnessed the kiss through the living room security camera. She knew what was happening, and she wouldn't allow a simple woman without a last name or pedigree to take the place she had sworn to protect since Haley's death, Alexander's late wife. That afternoon, during the cleaning of the rooms, Vivian discreetly entered the guest room where Grace slept. She looked around with the precision of someone who knew exactly what to do. From the pocket of her blazer, she pulled out a small necklace with a blue sapphire, a historically valuable piece that had belonged to Alexander's grandmother and was kept locked in the main safe. With light steps, she opened the nightstand drawer and placed it there between a book and a handkerchief. She smiled. "She's leaving today." Hours later, a maid was quietly instructed by Vivian to check something odd in the companion's room. And like a well-rehearsed play, the necklace was found. The news quickly reached Alexander. He came down the stairs with firm steps. His heart was racing, his mind conflicted. He found Grace in the backyard, watering flowers with Ethan beside her. "Grace," he called, his voice harsher than he intended. She turned around, surprised by his tone. "Can we talk alone?" Grace nodded, handed the watering can to Ethan, and kissed his forehead. "I'll be right back, my love." Alexander led her to the office. He closed the door carefully and remained standing, unable to sit. His eyes were clouded, his soul unsettled. "They found something in your room," he began, straight to the point. Grace frowned. "What?" "A necklace. A valuable necklace. Missing for weeks. It was in your drawer." She turned pale. "That's absurd. I'm just telling you what was reported." She stepped closer. "You think I would steal something from you, Alexander?" He looked away. "I don't know what to think." Grace felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. "You let me sleep under your roof. I care for your son like he's mine. And you still think I could steal? It's a family heirloom, and you're the only one with access to that room." She took a step back, her chest heaving, her eyes full of disappointment. You have everything, Alexander. Money, prestige, power. But you don't have the most basic thing, trust. He remained silent. The silence of cowards. The silence of someone who doubts the person they should trust most. Grace felt her eyes burn, but she didn't let the tears fall. She lifted her chin with dignity. If you doubt me, then it was never real. He tried to step closer. Grace, She raised her hand to stop him. Don't say anything else. She turned, left the office, and walked down the hall as if the weight of the world rested on her shoulders. Ethan came running the moment he saw her cross the foyer and ran to her. Where are you going? You promised you'd stay. She knelt, down, hugging him tightly. The tears were falling silently now. I wanted to stay, sweetheart, I really did. But not everyone here believes in me. I do, the boy said, his voice breaking. She kissed his forehead. Never forget that. And she walked out, with her small suitcase in hand, without looking back. Alexander watched everything from the upstairs balcony, and when he saw his son collapse to his knees on the floor, crying, a stab of something he couldn't name pierced his chest. But it was too late. Grace's absence wasn't felt all at once. It spread through the Whitmore mansion like a slow shadow, dimming the light that had, for a few brief weeks, warmed its hallways. At first it felt like just another silence. Then the silence turned into an echo. Ethan's laughter no longer rang through the corridors. The boys' smiles vanished from the mornings, and the lightness that used to fill breakfast was replaced by the clinking of silverware on plates in a lifeless ritual. On the fourth night after her departure, Ethan had another nightmare. Alexander found him sitting in bed, drenched in sweat, eyes wide open, his face pale. Where is she? He whispered through tears. Why isn't she coming back, Dad? I promised I'd protect her. Alexander couldn't say anything. He just sat on the edge of the bed and ran his hand through his son's hair, feeling guilt seep into every space Grace had once filled. He knew it wasn't just her physical presence that was missing. It was everything. The way she paid attention, how she listened with her soul, how she made time slow down. And for the first time in years, Alexander felt fear. Fear that he had pushed away something that might never return. The next morning, with trembling hands and a restless mind, he went to the mansion's security room, a discreet space, hidden behind panels and electronic doors. The internal cameras had recorded everything, and he knew exactly what he was looking for. Hours passed. He watched the footage like someone searching through their own heart. And then he saw it. Vivian, sneaking into the guest room on an afternoon, when Grace had gone out to the park with Ethan. She was carrying something small in her palm, the sapphire necklace, the missing heirloom. He watched her open the nightstand drawer with ease, place it precisely between a book and a piece of clothing. Then she smoothed the bed with her hand, as if trying to erase any trace, and left the room like someone finishing a task. Alexander paused the video. He stood there, motionless, his face stiff, his eyes locked on the screen. A mixture of rage, guilt, and disappointment rose in his chest like a wildfire. He pressed the intercom button. Vivian, my office. Now. She entered 15 minutes later, wearing her usual charcoal blazer and thin heels. Her hair pulled back perfectly, a frame of absolute control, but one look was enough to know she already knew. Alexander said nothing. He simply turned the monitor screen toward her. Vivian held her breath, but she didn't try to deny it. I did what I thought was right, she said, holding on to what dignity she had left. She was destroying the structure of your family. Haley's legacy. You were losing yourself. Alexander stood up. His posture was imposing, but his eyes were full of disappointment. She was the only real thing that entered this house in years, and you destroyed her. Vivian tried to justify herself. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, he interrupted. You wanted to keep me trapped in a past that no longer exists. And you sacrificed my son's present to do that." The silence that followed was harsher than any word. "Gather your things. You're fired. Immediately." She swallowed hard, eyes watering, but said nothing else. She walked out with heavy steps, taking with her the coldness that had always seemed to follow her. Hours later, Alexander wore a dark coat and drove himself through the streets of South Atlanta. The sky was overcast, the air damp, the asphalt still stained from recent rain. These streets didn't have the shine of the avenues where he lived. But they held a truth he was only beginning to understand, far too late. He stopped in front of a small house with a simple flowered front. The windows had thin curtains, and the yard was dotted with makeshift flower pots made from cut plastic bottles. A stray dog slept beside the steps. He knocked with a mix of anxiety and regret. His reflection in the window looked out of place there. The door opened slowly. Grace. Her hair was loose, wavy, damp from the light drizzle. She wore a large t-shirt and worn sweatpants, and yet there was a dignity in her that no luxury brand could ever mimic. Her eyes, however, were deeper, like someone who had cried more than she had slept. "Alexander, I needed to see you. Just listen. Please." She didn't respond right away. She stood in the doorway, one hand resting on the frame, half hidden, but her eyes showed there was still pain and curiosity. "It was Vivian," he began. "She set everything up. I saw the recordings. I took too long, but now I know." She took a deep breath, her chest rising slowly. "And what do you expect me to say? I don't expect anything. I just needed to look you in the eyes and tell you I was wrong, that I hurt you, that I was weak." Grace lowered her gaze. "I gave you everything I had, Alexander. Honesty, care, presence. And still, one necklace in a drawer was enough for you to throw it all away." He tried to step closer, but she didn't back away or move forward. "You destroyed something that had only just started to bloom. And flowers pulled too early never grow back the same." Alexander swallowed hard. His eyes welled, but he didn't cry. "If I had one chance, just one, I'd do it all differently." She looked up at him, sadness in her eyes. "But you don't," he nodded, defeated. "Just promise me one thing," he said, voice breaking. "If Ethan looks for you, don't turn him away. He needs you more than he needs me. He needs me." Grace felt her throat tighten, but gave a faint nod. Alexander turned and walked down the wet steps in silence. When he got into the car, he didn't start it right away. He just sat there, still, as the rain began to fall again. Now steady, constant, as if the sky had something to grieve too. And Grace, from behind the curtain, watched him leave with a heavy heart. She knew she had been true in everything, and that he would only understand that when it was too late. Autumn dressed. Atlanta in colors of farewell. Golden leaves fell like silent memories onto the damp sidewalks, and the warm evening wind carried the scent of wood, earth, and longing. It was one of those afternoons that seemed to carry a premonition. Grace walked slowly through the park, where she used to take Ethan to play. It had been weeks since she'd last been there, but the place felt untouched. The wooden benches still held the scent of sun, and the tall branches whispered stories only trees know how to keep. She wore a simple blue-toned dress and a light jacket. Her hair, loose and slightly tousled by the breeze, danced lightly over her shoulders, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had lost much and learned not to expect too much anymore. She didn't know Alexander would be there. It was Ethan who had insisted on seeing her. But when she saw him, standing in the distance near the oak tree, where the boy loved to draw with sticks in the dirt, something inside her stopped. Alexander looked different. No longer the man in a suit with absolute control. He wore a light shirt with rolled-up sleeves, his hair tousled by the wind, And his gaze was different, vulnerable, human, real. He took a step forward. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice hoarse, like someone who had rehearsed every syllable. For days, Grace stayed silent. She looked around, as if the park itself had changed just because he was there. "You seemed taller last time," she said with a faint, ironic smile, the only shield she had left. Alexander smiled too, but there was pain in it. "And you seemed more distant, but now I get it. It wasn't you who was far away. It was me who didn't know how to get close." She looked at him. Her words came without protection. "You broke me, Alexander. When you doubted me, it wasn't just a mistake. It was like you ripped me out of the one place I wanted to be most. And I've been pushed out of a lot of places, but never by someone I trusted." He stepped closer. There was sincerity in his eyes, but also contained pain, the kind carried by someone with too many regrets. "You saved my son, Grace. When no one else saw him, you did. And later, without even knowing it, you saved me too. And I was a coward. I chose to believe a lie instead of risking living a truth." Grace looked away, biting her lip, trying to hold back the emotions that begged to spill out. "But he continued. I grew up surrounded by contracts, protocols, appearances. I learned to trust systems, not people, to live behind walls, not build bridges. But with you, you made me feel. You made me see. You made me listen." Then he stood before her. He gently touched her hands, as if asking permission even before the touch. She didn't pull away. "I didn't come with a ring. Already made promises," he said, kneeling on the leaf-covered ground, without rush, without fear of looking. "Vulnerable. I came with the only thing I have that's real. I don't want an employee or a memory. I want my partner, my home, and my home is wherever you are." Grace's heart raced. It was as if every word said everything she had always wanted to hear, but never believed she would hear from someone like him. Tears began to fall slowly down her cheeks, but she didn't hide them. "You know what I am, Alexander," she murmured, voice trembling. "I'm the woman who cleaned houses, where no one even offered me a glass of water. I'm the daughter who learned to take care on her own. The woman who's heard no more times than the world could count. And still, I waited to be seen." He stood slowly, still holding her hands. "And I see you, Grace. I see you now, fully, with everything you are, and I swear, I'll never look away again." She laughed through her tears. "I never thought someone like you would truly see me. And I never thought I'd fall in love with the one person who forced me to face who I am." And then, as if everything said dissolved into the only thing left to do, they kissed. It was a slow kiss, enveloping, full of unspoken layers. It wasn't just a reunion. It was the seal of everything they had lived, the wordless forgiveness, the new beginning with scars. Across the park, Ethan watched with wide eyes and a growing smile. He ran toward them with open arms. "I knew it!" he shouted, throwing himself at them with pure joy. "I knew you two would love each other forever." Alexander lifted his son into the air, spinning him around as Grace hugged them both from behind. And for a moment, there, between falling leaves, real laughter, and the warmth of the setting, "Son," the world stood still. Because in that moment, at last, 3 lives had found one another, not by luck, but by courage. And as the sun began to slip behind the trees, the 3 walked on side by side, as if they had always belonged, together, like a family. A year later, the Whitmore mansion seemed like a different place, not because of the walls or the luxury. That had always been there. What had changed was the silence. It no longer ruled like before. Now it was replaced by voices, laughter, and footsteps filling the hallways with life. Ethan ran through the gardens in his school uniform, his backpack hanging crookedly from his shoulders, and a new dog named Oliver trying to keep up with him. Inside the house, Grace was, organizing the last documents of the day. The office, once untouchable, now had flowers on the sideboard, Ethan's drawings quietly taped to a wall, and a picture frame with a simple photo. The three of them lying on the grass, laughing. Alexander leaning over her, his beard unshaven. Grace with messy hair, Ethan in the middle, hugging them both with a smile that said everything. But that morning, the focus wasn't there. The entire city was mobilized for the grand opening of a groundbreaking social space, Project Aurora, envisioned by Grace, fully funded by the Whitmore family, but with a mission that went far beyond money. Located in a historically overlooked neighborhood, the two-story building would house workshops, a community daycare, legal and psychological support for single mothers, women in vulnerable situations, and survivors of abuse. The space was modern, welcoming, with circular gardens, wide-windowed rooms, inspiring quotes on the walls, and handmade toys in the courtyard. Outside, a crowd gathered: journalists, NGO representatives, local residents, mothers with babies in their arms, volunteers in blue shirts with tired but genuine smiles. It was a big event, but full of soul. And in the middle of it all, on a small stage decorated with wildflowers and light fabrics, stood Grace Holloway Whitmore. She wore an off-white linen dress that left her shoulders bare and her scars visible. Her hair was elegantly tied up. Her eyes were painted with restrained emotion. Her voice echoed through the microphone with strength, but never lost its sweetness. 1 year ago, I was still cleaning hallways that told me with their silence that I didn't belong there. 1 year ago, I swallowed every unspoken word, every silent humiliation, every judgment disguised as kindness. I thought dignity was a luxury for the few. She paused. The crowd held its breath. She looked at them, eyes shining. Her hand trembled as she held the speech pages, but her heart was steady. But everything started to change when a child saw me. A wave of emotion rippled through the audience. She smiled gently. He didn't look at me with suspicion. He didn't ask where I came from. He just held my hand. And in his eyes, I saw something no one had ever told me before. I existed. I mattered. She paused again, now turning her gaze toward the left side of the crowd. There was Alexander, wearing a light gray suit, no tie, his face emotional. Beside him, Ethan, his hair combed to the side, clutching his father's hand tightly. Later, it was his father who began to see me, and with effort, courage, and a few stumbles, he learned to look past the walls he had built, and through that, I came to understand something simple, yet powerful. She took a deep breath. The sunlight touched her face, lighting it up like a revelation. I was invisible for a long time, until a child saw me, and with him came a love that changed my life, not because it saved me, but because it allowed me to grow. The crowd was overwhelmed. Some women wiped tears from their eyes. Others quietly hugged each other. Grace stepped down from the stage with tears in her eyes. Ethan ran to her and hugged her tightly. "You're the most important person in the world, Mom," he whispered in her ear. She smiled, letting the tears fall freely. "No, my love, I just learned from the best." Alexander walked over, took Grace's hand in his, and kissed her fingers in front of everyone. Not out of obligation, but out of pride. Together, they walked to the main courtyard where a young tree had been planted, a white ipe, a symbol of new beginnings. At the base of the tree, a bronze plaque shone in the sunlight. "Sometimes it's in the middle of pain that love finds the courage to be born." There, in that moment, there were no spotlights. There was truth. There was truth. There was redemption. There was love. And there were three hearts, Once broken, alone and wounded, now bound together by something that not even time could erase. A new story, written with tears, but sealed with hope. And for the first time, everyone there knew. Grace Holloway was no longer invisible. She was light, she was root, she was home. And now I want to hear from you. What did you think of this story? Leave your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments and tell me which part touched your heart the most. If this story moved you, like the video, share it with someone special and subscribe to the channel. That helps us keep bringing more stories like this one. And before you go, I've picked out another powerful story that will surely touch you even more. Just click on the screen and keep going on this journey with us.